there are a number of recruiters who are unbelievably professional and who genuinely want to do a very good job for the over 50 audience. They will openly say about 60, 70% of their clients don't want older candidates.
Why do you think there is this discrimination against the older workforce?
Well, I mean, we don't have to think, we know. Because again, the research, the evidence, the surveys have been done. You know, any organisation that is thinking, we are expanding, we would like to recruit more people, the only area of growth is actually from that 50 plus market.
Where should ageing candidates potentially go to try and find their next opportunity?
I do already say to people, don't bother with Indeed. So for us, it's pretty clear that that's not the right method. The right methods are going to be...
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Open to Work podcast. We are joined again today, one of our first ever repeating guests, by Lucy Standing from Brave Starts. Welcome back, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Matthew. It's very good to be back.
So this episode is kind of coming to us pretty fast off of a live event, basically. It's happened within the past 2 weeks, where we're responding essentially to a pretty misguided post from Indeed. Why don't you kind of give us a little bit of an introduction to maybe who Indeed are and then what this post is and your kind of thoughts on it?
Yeah. So, well, Indeed, first and foremost, probably the largest online recruitment agency. They're responsible for posting millions of jobs, not just across the UK, across Europe, across the world. You could argue, given the millions of people that submit CVs and online applications through Indeed, that they would be unbelievably well informed about the range of people at different stages and ages in life to know better. But apparently they don't. So the article that they put out essentially indicated that as you get to be a little bit older, for the record, Matthew, I am 50 years old. I really don't want to believe that I am in a period of decline. And yet, according to Indeed, that's exactly where I am. And that was what sparked really the outrage, is the use of that kind of terminology. So decline. And actually, I think the reality for many people at this stage in life is actually this is at the point where we are just getting started. It was picked up on.
Maybe and be really specific in what they put out a kind of piece of an article that used an infographic that said that there were multiple career stages that people go through. So exploration stage, which is 21 to 25, the establishment stage, which is 25 to 35, the mid-career stage, which is 35 to 45, the late career stage, which is 45 to 55, and the decline stage, which is 55 to 65.
Yeah, there you go. So I don't know how much longer you've got to go before you start getting to the decline point, Matthew. You still
got a few years yet,
apparently not that long.
But I think, and maybe I should be misquoted. I don't want to be misquoted on this, but I believe that the Indeed CEO would be in his decline stage, from my understanding of reading different reports.
Yeah. Oh, the irony.
Yeah.
And maybe we could use this as, if there was to be any supporting evidence of that being the case, well, maybe that would be it.
So the online reaction to this was really swift. So why don't you maybe summarize what the kind of response to this was and why you feel like this was an extremely misguided place for Indeed to go?
Well, the person who called it out, so we need to kind of credit. So it was Sarah Taylor Phillips. She runs a business called Career Voyager. She's also herself a career guidance expert, and she also specialises in supporting people as they get a little bit older in their life. So this is the sort of content that's on her radar, and went about posting as you do. But this particular post, I think the level of anger and the level of, if we were to sort of if I think about the fact that we have a community of people, largely speaking, over the age of 45, 50, experiencing unbelievably difficult, hard levels of, this recruitment market is so challenging. And what we're talking about is real anxiety, real fear, real anger, actually. And that's the audience that you're talking about. So you put an article or a post out there indicating that, you're basically dropping off and that you're entering this period of decline. You are compounding that with a very sensitive audience. And that audience, rightly, and particularly as that's sort of Sarah's game, they're all following her, we're all following each other. So a number of people then go on to repost the post. And long story short, it goes viral. It reaches the hundreds of thousands. People are reposting on it. They're commenting, the outrage. The CEO was approached for comment, and as far as I know, hasn't actually responded personally to it. But I think you've got an official response.
Yeah, I think the official response from Indeed was that we deeply apologise for the content contained in the article. The content was wrong, period. It doesn't reflect our values of inclusivity, our hiring practices, or the way our website operates. We are committed to our mission to help all people of all ages get jobs.
Are they, though?
I would like to add, if you Google right now, Indeed ageism, the top article you get is posted from the day after this, which was how to hire inclusively at all ages, and is the number one report searched result now, is the number one produced result on Google when you type in Indeed ageism. And the articles that talk about this are kind of further down on the Google page. They've clearly done some very good SEO writing immediately after this to try and combat people being able to search and engage with this post specifically. And this entire article has been taken down and is not able to be read. There's been people who are writing about it on Forbes and on LinkedIn, on The Independent, and kind of calling out that this really significant misstep, which has also kind of slipped by the media. Like, generally speaking, the media hasn't really caught this.
Yeah.
And I saw some really interesting stats, and I'm sure that maybe we'll talk these through in a second. But like, to put some context around why this is a poor and very mistaken thing, it enables us to think that it enables the recruiting industry as a whole to continue to criticize and devalue one of the fastest growing segments of our society, I know, of our workforce, which is obviously something you do with Brave Stars. But I pulled out some stats that from Sarah, and I wanted to share them with you. Almost 50% of workers will be 50 in the UK workforce within 2 years. The 60 plus category will grow by almost 40%. By 2050, the UK working population will have reduced by 25%, and 7 million young people enter the workforce, but 10 to 12 million more experienced workers exit. There are 16% fewer 20 to 29-year-olds than there are 50 to 59-year-olds. So I think it kind of demonstrates how wildly misguided this post is for the entirety of our UK workforce.
It's when we keep hearing, I mean, if it's not just about the fact that older people are living longer, and therefore there is this significant appetite from people over the age of 50 to remain in and stay engaged in the workforce. But the reality is the younger people are not being replaced. So across the world, we're seeing a falling decline in the population. So the only area of growth, any organization that is thinking, we are expanding, we would like to recruit more people, the only area of growth is actually from that 50 plus market. So to be turning off the taps to the 50 plus individual is remarkably misguided.
I think, it enables a systemic discrimination of one of the most important workforces of the next, 30 years of our life. Like, and other recruiters will read this, and people all around the world will read this, and it will just continue to leak into the subconscious that hiring older people is negative for your business and is not something you should be actively thinking about or engaging with.
Yeah. And yet the evidence, when, let's be clear, not many organizations are doing an awful lot to test and experiment with this, because so many people do lead with that stereotype. Let's just not bother recruiting the older people in the first place. But actually, one of the best pieces of evidence looking at this was done by the OECD last year in collaboration with an organization called Generation, where over 1,500 people were hired into a range of different jobs across Europe, the US, 8 different countries. 1,500 hiring managers were involved. And what they found is that 89% of the time, the older cohort were people were not only performing as well, but most of the time better than younger cohorts. It is an opportunity of the largest, most catastrophic missed, it's just a big missed opportunity.
Why do you think there is this discrimination against the older workforce?
Well, I mean, we don't have to think, we know. Because again, the research, the evidence, the surveys have been done. When you ask hiring managers, do you want to hire older people? The majority of them say No. And that really starts to kick in when people are above the age of 55. So from about 45 onwards, we start to see a decline towards wanting to hire older people. But at 55, it's almost like it falls off a cliff. About 50% of the time, people just will not touch you. And there are a number of reasons for that. So the data shows, number one, people worry that they are not going to adapt and learn. However, the evidence shows that that's not a valid concern. Number two, they believe that they're not keeping up to date with technology, which again, we can prove people can adapt and pick up new technology, so not an issue either. Number three, they're worried that they will not get on or collaborate successfully with younger employees. But again, the research and the evidence tends to show that actually it's the older people, because values change with age. So actually, as people get older, what they value more and what they want to get out of work is actually supporting, collaborating. They're actually less inclined to want to pursue jobs up through a career ladder. If anything, they would rather go down and take less responsibility. So actually, that support of younger people, you are more likely to get that from an older cohort.
There's an interesting model as well that I think really speaks to that, where you have kind of in lots of businesses, you sort of have two types of employees. And I think it's in Good to Great that they talk about this, but you have two types of employees. One that's kind of your quote unquote rock stars, that they would call it. They're rocketing through the business. They have an incredibly, they're having a huge impact, and they are like super innovative, and they're hungry to move up the ladder and all that sort of stuff. And then you have this other cohort that is like happy to do the job that they're doing, and they're performing at a very high level, and they actually they could do those things, but they don't have any interest. And I always say that like those sorts of people are immensely valuable and should be looked after, and the impact that they can have for someone who's very happy to be an expert in what they do and not move on in kind of major ways, I think is something that we are missing in lots of our workforces at the moment. And when we've kind of, because we've created, I guess, a millennial and Gen Z and Gen Y and Gen Alpha workforce that's like, go and grow as much as possible and be as curious as possible and go do as much as possible, and you can do anything. But actually we sort of then put them in, we put them through these insanely expensive education programs, and then we put them in a seat and go, yeah, but now we just want you to be able to do this one thing over and over again, and it's a highly administrative role, and it's going to be a while until you get to the point where you can be creative. And so like it's a real whereas we have another workforce that's like quite happy to do maybe some of these things that maybe the newer kind of generation would just hate to do. Do you think there's anything to that?
I think there is, and it shows a kind of a bias towards things that are kind of leadership, developmental orientated. As in, there's a lot of focus on, here are these high potential people, these people that you describe, the aspirational, want to climb up through a career ladder, want to do it all guns blazing, and they're power hungry and they're promotion hungry, money hungry, these sorts of things. Brilliant, great. Let's put them on a high potential program. A lot of the time when those high potential programs are evaluated, they are looking at whether or not people who are high potential have enjoyed going through a high potential program. So lo and behold, a lot of the time people say, yeah, I kind of enjoyed it. So the research is quite poor, because actually what a lot of this research doesn't consider is what's the impact of that on the other people, right? I mean, if by definition you're throwing these people into a high potential bucket, are you defining everyone else as no potential or low potential? Yeah. And how do they feel about not getting any of that investment? Because again, that's the issue. Not only are older people not being recruited, they are not being invested in. So they are the one, once you hit 40 plus, you are the least likely demographic in an organization to receive any kind of career development investment.
Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all. So what do you think Indeed's responsibility is here as one of the largest job boards, if not the largest job board in the world? What do you think they should be doing as an important player in the landscape of how people get jobs?
Well, it'd be nice if they actually catered to people's needs. So bearing in mind that, with a 100-year life, which is pretty much what we're looking at here, people are going to have to change jobs several times throughout the course of their working life.
Maybe careers entirely as well. There's a lot of indication that you have multiple careers now through a lifespan.
Absolutely. And yet, if you were to look at an Indeed jobs board, your starting point is to type in the title of the job that you want to get. Do I want to be an accountant? Do I want to be a talent management professional? Do I want to be a, paralegal, whatever it might be? For someone, our evidence, and this is based on 6,500 people, and admittedly they are over 50, but our evidence from that fairly large cohort, and I would argue representative sample, is 73% of them, their biggest barrier to work is having no idea what job it is they want to do next. Now, perfectly happy to completely learn new things. That's actually one of their drivers, right? They want to learn new things. You've done the last job for 25, 30 years. Actually, you can be quite bored of it, but you're open-minded to trying new things. What I'm not going to find on an Indeed jobs board are all of the opportunities of companies open-minded to take people who've got various different experiences, but who are willing to retrain and to do something new.
And
so those
how
kind
do
of
you see that playing
career
out?
change opportunities are not being shared.
Mm-hmm. And how do you, what responsibility do you think that kind of the government has now to kind of step in and like try and address this, really what is going to be an economic problem? Like, it's going to impact our workforce, it's going to impact our GDP in the years to come, and our productivity as a nation in years to come. What do you think? And I imagine this is consistent data around many Western countries as well. What is the responsibility of government to address this?
Well, number one, they're going to have to regulate recruitment. We're not asking for much, but there is a very, very simple tool, which is actually, if you are not allowed to discriminate unfairly on the basis of age, you should be able to prove that it's not happening. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't have access to that data, but Indeed, who are collecting CVs from hundreds of thousands, millions and millions of people, they will have the capacity to ask a very basic question, which is, what's your age? Mm-hmm. And if that's it, part of the reason Indeed argue that they can't do that is because they feel, or they argue, or they say, if we were to ask that question, people would perceive us to be ageist. So I can understand that objection.
Whoops.
But the only way to get around that objection is to make it mandatory for everybody. Because if I ask Indeed at the moment, and I have, so I have contacted Indeed, I've contacted LinkedIn, I've contacted Hayes, and I've contacted Reed. And I've asked them all to say to me, what's the proportion of people who over the age of 50 get an interview versus people, say, under the age of 40? And they all turn around and they all say, sorry, we don't collect the data. So without collecting the data, they are not telling the employers who are paying them to advertise the jobs, they're not telling them that actually they're being ageist. So organisations have got no idea that this is even a problem.
What's quite interesting about that is that LinkedIn have also rolled out a very recent verifications segment where they have asked people to upload their passport and confidential, essentially, personal identifiable information about who they are. And so they do have this data against your profile, and Indeed would have this data against your profile if you set up an Indeed profile. And it's not uncommon for when you set up a profile with someone to declare your age as part of that, or enter your date of birth to sign up effectively. LinkedIn will, without a doubt, have my age accurately on their database, and should be able to anonymize that and be able to report on it. And it's interesting that they don't do that, because the functionality, if you set up an account, would almost certainly be there.
And yet, so, I mean, I'm not speaking on behalf of all recruiters, but there are a number of recruiters who are unbelievably professional and who genuinely want to do a very good job for the over 50 audience. A woman called Natasha Cleave, Oakleaf Recruitment. There are loads of them. However, they will openly say about 60, 70% of their clients don't want older candidates. Mm-hmm. So they're up against this brick wall of trying to argue, but these people are brilliant, please interview them. And the clients are going, no. So if you like, the employing organisations, they are the one at fault here, but they are using the recruiter as the person who is rejecting candidates on their behalf.
And so what do you think what would be a recommendation to businesses on how to start addressing this problem within their recruiting organisation?
There's a lot of different things you need to start. At the very minimum, I'd say you've got to open up and you've got to be saying, we do welcome and want applications across the board. So there's a number of sort of subtle things you can do around that, using the sort of the language, the imagery that you're using, making sure, for example, that things like apprenticeships or entry-level jobs, you might be advertising the face of someone who's, say, 50 or 60. So all of the subtle messages that say, yes, you're going to be welcome if you are an older candidate, need addressing. The application process itself, I mean, I would argue that recruitment is broken not just because recruiters are not asking the right questions or informing people about the right sorts of things or even solving the right kind of problems for people. But recruitment itself is usually quite lazy. So the majority of organisations in the UK, I only speaking about the UK, I don't know data for the US, majority of organisations will use an interview as a method of assessment. And ultimately, the best assessment method is going to be something that enables the person themselves to self-select. So we're talking things like job shadowing, work experience opportunities, the number of people who inside an organization, in order to move to a different department, would probably have to leave, do a job somewhere else, and then apply for a job to move back, is crazy. We don't have organizations encouraging the sorts of internal mobility that actually would prevent many of them from needing to recruit in the first place. You know, there's this quite often the sort of the list of skills that we want someone to have is not a match for people's actual experience, but that doesn't mean it's a match to their potential. If I give you one example, you know, we'll have people who will say to me, oh, I'm quite interested, for example, in being a charity trustee or having this sort of board level position. I can't tick those boxes yet. You say, okay, well, go and shadow it for one day, right? Often that's all it takes. And once they're in an environment where they think, okay, I haven't got those skills, but I can see what the job entails, and I'm really confident I can do that job. Well, that half the time is the impetus to get people to, you know, complete the training or to jump over the barrier or the hurdle they need to jump over. That's not the difficult bit. The difficult bit is getting them to understand that they can do that job and that they want to do that job in the first place. You know, it's like nobody wants to go and put themselves through the pain of a driving test. You do it because you want to learn to drive. You know, you might put yourself through the pain of, you know, this 1 week AI course or whatever it might be. If you know at the end of it, that's a realistic chance I actually want to do that job. Mm-hmm. And that's where so many organizations fail.
I agree. And there's a really seminal article that I'll try and include in the comments that basically does a meta-analysis. I think we maybe spoke about this last time on the different assessment selection methods and as it relates to their bias and their ability to be able to attract candidates effectively and assess candidates equitably. And work samples are the best indicator of whether or not someone's going to be successful in role, and also the most equitable way of assessing someone's skills. So but very rarely are these properly rolled out within businesses. And there's this kind of general movement towards skills-based hiring, I think, which will start to change the language about how we think about hiring, which is like decades too late, to be honest. Simultaneously, I think one of the big transitions we're starting to see is a focus on internal mobility, because businesses have realized that they're within their own business, they need to be able to, that it's much more valuable and there's much more greater return on their investment if they actively think about how to support people moving. Even someone who is moving into a whole new function will be able to bring with them all the context and experience of working in this business. And if they can show that curiosity and capability to learn, they're often given that opportunity. I've worked with lots of recruiting and people leaders that when they went through the great kind of reduction of recruiting staff in the end of, and during COVID and in 2022 and 2023, they moved all of their recruiting team and they gave all of their recruiters opportunities to interview in all these other like sales oriented departments that were still growing. I think that is a really important part of internal mobility and gives lots of people opportunities for the future. And I think it's just good recruiting practice overall.
It is, because at the end of the day, recruiters have got the power to make a selection decision, but not an engagement one. You know, only I've got the power to make a potential, yes, that job's going to engage me decision. Yeah. But I need the data to make that decision. It's not a one-way street. The more you make it a two-way street, the much better. You know, even the best method of assessment at the moment, if we approximate it with an assessment center, you know, you're going to be predicting future success about 38% of the time. You know, it's not ideal. We need to do more to try and give people that sense of what is the job all about, so they can select a bit more.
So we've said that it sounds like you should be using Indeed for your job search. Where should aging candidates potentially go to try and find their next opportunity? We are delighted to be sponsored by Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations like interviews, intakes, and debriefs, and then provides a perfectly summarized note of everything that was discussed. That means that you can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. I've spoken to so many recruiters and recruiting leaders who are loving using Metaview across their organizations. It's saving them time, but it also means that they have more data to make better decisions. So for every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can now make confident and informed decisions, and recruiters can finally take control of the interview process. The impact on candidate experience is also massive. Since recruiters don't have to worry about taking notes in the moment, they can really focus on being present and engaged with you. Forward-thinking recruiters at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora are all leveling up their interviews with Metaview. So head on over to metaview.ai/open to work to get started for free on your first 5 calls.
Well, I don't know all of the recruiters, Matthew, and I don't, almost by saying a couple, I feel like I'm not saying the rest, and that's really not fair and right for me to do. I mean, I would definitely, I do already say to people, don't bother with Indeed. And I'm quite open about that, because our data certainly shows. So we follow up with people 9-10 months after they've started working with us. And I have to be clear and say this is mainly anecdotal at this point. But the number of people I know who've got a job using a traditional jobs board is less than about 10%. So for us, it's pretty clear that that's not the right method. The right methods are going to be the much more proactive, creating a job, working through your network, volunteering into a role, sweat equity. So identifying the companies that you feel you can add the most value to, and then making sure that you're negotiating some sort of a, what can I get off the back of it? We are seeing a lot of people start their own businesses.
I'd love to pause on the concept of sweat equity. If I look back at the comments that we received after your previous episode, by far the greatest heat, let's say, you received was by saying that people should work for free. What's kind of your, maybe re-articulate that kind of perspective and kind of what did you say to people who are kind of saying, why should I have to work for free? Why it's ridiculous that you would say that that I should have to work for free. People were quite frustrated by some of those, by that kind of concept. So maybe I'd love you to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Well, I guess to a degree, I'd say, why shouldn't you? I do believe that if you're working for free, being exploited because you are bringing value to an organization and you're learning nothing, you're contributing, you're getting nothing in return for your effort, that's a very different kettle of fish from, learning, earning a job title, getting yourself the work experience that you might want, building up your confidence level. These are all valuable exchanges. I looked, for example, the other day at London Business School, the Sloan Masters, 1 year, and you'll pay £93,500 to do that. So you're going to pay £93,000. I know not everyone's going to go to LBS, but £93,500 for a year of, fine, you'll develop a network, you'll develop a lot of theory, and you'll learn a few things. If you are doing that for free, it is not costing you £93,000. So that to me seems like a bit of a bargain. The other thing I'd say is when someone comes and works for me as a volunteer, I'm not paying them, but it takes an awful lot of time to get people trained up. It takes an awful lot of time supervising them. I'm then having to give them feedback. If they let me down, it's my time doing the quality control assurance. Who's paying me? Mm-hmm. So, where things are a fair exchange, it's not exploitative. Now, that's a very personal identification for each individual. But as long as you are getting something out of the exchange, then I would say it's not exploitation. But you have to be earning something in return. And that's part of your skill as a negotiator. And if it's not part of your skill set now, it is going to have to be.
I love framing that against what this kind of comfort level that people have to pay for what is it, an extortionate amount for like the same outcome essentially. And I never did an MBA because I felt like I could get better real life experience, and that's why I joined startups and stuff like that, so I could see how the sausage is made from the other side, which ironically you would end up studying if you went and did an MBA. And we were talking before this, and I was saying, maybe we should collaborate on like bringing on someone who could support with the community and the podcast and stuff like that, and that would be able to pay them initially. And the question was like, what is the skill they're going to return? And if they're successful, what does that look like as a way of rewarding them? And I like that methodology and that kind of that approach. And I think it also encourages me as the kind of business owner in that situation to go, right, how can I actually, give this person something special and I kind of support this person in navigating their career, but also make sure that they are rewarded for the impact that I'm going to receive from them in my business, which I think is really important as well. So this mutual value exchange, if you can get to it, I think you're right, is really, really important and really valuable.
Yeah, totally. I'll give you one example. When I was vice chair of the Association for Business Psychology, that's an unpaid role. Okay. I would also argue there's not an awful lot of professional kudos from it. However, if I'm contacting leading professors across the world and I say I'm the vice chair and I'm inviting you to come and do a keynote, that leads to a conversation. That leads to a LinkedIn connection. That leads to a network and somebody I can come back to, and they will know who I am. It leads to, there are so many other things. When I'm in an interview and someone says, what experience do you have running a conference? Well, fine. I may not have been paid for it, but I can tell them all about sponsor relationships, all about how many people, what pricing impact, locations, all the sorts of things you have to think about, which kind of talks are going to be the most popular. The value you get from learning something new is incredible, which is why I think a lot of the time people are prepared to pay for a training course or, for some sort of qualification. But they seem to think that the only thing that's worth paying for is theory. And I'd argue that increasingly we will have to consider how we pay for the experience we need, because a lot of the time that's the barrier. How do you do a job without experience? If you want someone to give you that experience, and if that's taking up my time and energy, if you're not going to pay me for it, maybe at the very least you have to give me some labor.
Yeah, I really, really like that approach, and I hope that other people I think that definitely answers the question. My last question for you. Have you seen the film The Intern?
I have.
What's your hot take on the film The Intern?
I love it, for a start, is my emotional reaction to it. But I would love to see more organisations almost guarantee if we're going to offer internships, we want to see them offered across the board, all ages, all stages. But wearing my kind of slight psychology hat on it, I would say, please capture and evaluate the data so everyone else can learn from it and help prove the business case for everybody else.
Mm-hmm. I really like. I was watching that movie the other day, and I thought of you immediately as I was watching it. I almost texted you as I was watching it. And it's a kind of, for anyone who's not watched it, it's a context of a Nancy Meyers movie where an older gentleman becomes an intern who is in his 60s and ends up joining a startup and becoming a chief, like a sort of EA intern to the CEO of the business. And it is very heartwarming, and it's to see the impact of bringing in the mix of these traditional values with new kind of hypergrowth values as well, and how those things merge. And I think a lot of what you spoke to really speaks, was echoed in how that movie represented the older character played by Robert De Niro. His ability to understand and to empathize and to be able to build relationships with people and to all that sort of stuff was so was interestingly realized. And my only criticism was that there's not a single non-white person in the entire movie, which I think Nancy Meyers could probably take note of for the future. But other than that, I thought it articulated this issue very well, and represented the positive impact that could come from it. And bearing in mind that's over a decade old now. Thank you so much, Lucy. So you can find Lucy on Standing on LinkedIn. She's the CEO of Brave Starts, which is a fantastic community that I'd highly recommend checking out. It's an immense amount of value for any people who are kind of seeking, who are changing their jobs and going through kind of a career transition over 50. For anyone else, there's also the Open to Work community, which you can subscribe to now at opentowork.community, where you can get access to job search advisors to help navigate your job search. And obviously, we will be here free indefinitely, right? We are here to support people on their job search, no matter where you are in the world and what your approach is or how old you are. We want to be able to create content that's going to be valuable for you in your job search. And hopefully, a lot was covered here. Again, but also reinforced, how important this conversation around the aging workforce is to the future of our economy, of our businesses, and it's also just the right thing to do. So thank you, Lucy, again for coming on to the Open to Work podcast, and we'll see you again soon.
You're very welcome. Thank you.